Well, good morning and welcome to our workshop number 14. We will be talking about the water use efficiency standards. I'm excited to be here and we have an action-packed agenda for you today. We're going to go over the final adopted regulations of Conservation Way of Life. Elizabeth Loveson is going to help present that. We're going to go over the CI classification guidebook that came out, the CI DIM guidebook that came out. We're going to talk a little about the reporting tool. We have two people here that are going to talk about what they've seen so far. The draft tool has been kind of released to a testing group. And so we'll kind of get some feedback about that. And then we're going to talk about the regulation timeline, the long-term view, and then how do we do the first few steps. We realize it's going to be a marathon. The timeline goes all the way out to 2045, but what can we do between now and December before our first reporting deadline of January 1st? Give just a few tidbits about the ADOA the Water Smart Innovations Conference, which was last week, and also give you a resource cheat sheet of all the great things coming and then where they actually posted. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth, and she's going to kick us off on the final adoption regulations.
Good morning and welcome. As Michelle said, this is our 14th workshop, but we're really transitioning now from informing people about the regulations and starting to look at implementation of the regulations. We're planning to have 6 of these in the next year. The goal is to provide tools and information that people can use as they work towards implementation. So go to the first slide. So just looking at a timeline and how we got here, back in 2009, there was 20 by 2020, and really that first time we were given quantifiable regulations that required us to reduce demand, and it was a percentage. One of the challenges was that with that percentage approach is that it was somewhat one size fits all, in that if you'd already done a lot of conservation, it really didn't take that into account. It still required you to reduce demand. If you had a warmer climate, it didn't take that into account. So making conservation of California a way of life was developed in really a budget-based approach. We had implementation legislation in 2018 that really kind of provided a framework of how the regulation was going to be developed. DWR did several years of studies and work groups, really intense work to come up with recommendations as to what the standards would be for the regulation. Those were released in 2022. And 2023, we had the indoor legislation approved, water loss regulation adopted, and of course, the state board released its first draft regulation. Final regulations were adopted by the State Water Resources Control Board on July 3rd. There were a few little tweaks that were done after that, but really nothing major changed. And so now we've got the regulations. The first reporting starts in January, and it's time to really work on implementation. Next slide. Water use objectives. Providers cannot exceed the sum of the standards. And just for those on the phone, providers are retail urban water suppliers. The budgets are based on indoor residential, outdoor, CII, dedicated irrigation meter outdoor, water loss, and variances. Next slide. One of the first standards that was set actually was set in the 2018 legislation and then updated in 2023 is the indoor standard. And it's going to take each member agency's service area population multiplied by the number of days in the year, and then use the GPCD standard. The GPC standard starts at 55 and then ratchets down to 42 in 2030. One of the requirements of the legislation that was passed in 2023 was that DWR would do some studies on the impacts on things like wastewater and even water treatment systems, and report back as to what those might be by lowering the indoor standards. So they're starting those studies right now, and we'll continue to watch and see what they come up with over the next couple of years. Next slide. The outdoor residential use standard, this was set by the regulation that was adopted in July. It takes the supplier's climate, so your ET values, times your landscape area, times your efficiency factor. So this standard is actually going to change on a year-to-year basis. The ET is going to be updated every year, and so if we have a cool year, it'll be smaller. If we have a drier year and warmer year, it'll be higher. Landscape area was provided by DWR. If you have not gotten that, or you don't know where your landscape area is, you go ahead and contact DWR. They have sent it out. Somebody in your agency at one point got the irrigable area and irrigated area, and for all of your residential accounts. One of the things that was included in the regulation that was passed is that 20% of the irrigable, not irrigated area was included in the landscape landscape area that's in the standard. Now, this irrigable, not irrigated area was anything that was in the aerial that looked like it could have been irrigated at one point, but it was not. And so when DWR did a study of water use, they actually found that about 20% of that INI area was actually being irrigated, even though the aerial imagery did not reflect that. And so it's not a variance, it's not a bonus or anything like that. It's just recognizing that there is some areas that were identified as not irrigated that it actually are irrigated. And that is going to be in place until landscape area is updated by the state. The efficiency factor, again, will start out at 0.8, and then it's going to go down to 0.55 and 24 and on. And so this is going to be something that's going to have to be done across the state. We're going to have to be really investing in improving the efficiency of existing landscape and moving forward with any new landscape as well, making sure that they're really meeting those current MWILO standards so that they're meeting that 0.55 target. Next slide. Outdoor irrigation meter standard, very similar to the residential. The one difference is, well, actually there's a couple differences. The first difference is that DWR is going to provide some area, and we'll go into this in a little bit more detail. We have information on this, but the supplier is actually going to need to classify those areas into dedicated meters, recycled water use, that kind of thing. So there's quite a bit of work that's going to have to be done for the dedicated irrigation meters and the landscape measurements that need to be done. And then the efficiency factor starts at 0.8 and drops down to 0.45. Again, 0.45 is what is included in MWILO for non-residential areas. So next slide. Water loss is a unique one because it was set by legislation on its own, and so it can actually be enforced independently. It's based on a real loss standard value that was calculated using a formula that the state board put together, a calculator. There's a lot of information and a lot of details that need to go into water loss. Again, we'll provide more information on it, but one thing to know is that water loss is the one area of this standard that can be enforced independently. If you're not meeting your water loss standard, you can get conservation orders, you can get fined, other things like that. So it can be enforced independently. Next slide. One of the big changes in the regulation that was approved is a alternative compliance pathway. And so for water suppliers that have a very large, either more than 20% or more than 30%, depending on whether your average income is below the median household income or above that, you will have the ability to put together a plan that reduces your waste by between 1 or 2% per year. And if you're following that plan and you're achieving those targets, you're going to be in compliance with the objective, even if you haven't met your long-term target. And again, this is really just giving extra time for agencies that have a very large amount of water that they have to reduce, and an alternative pathway. Next slide. CII measures, there's several different components of the performance measures. These are not quantifiable, but they are, at least the savings portion of them aren't quantifiable, but there are certain steps that you have to take, including classification. Great news, we have tools for you on that we're going to talk about today. Large landscapes, for those that are large landscapes that are currently on mixed use meter, you're going to have to either put in a dam or have some sort of in lieu technology in there so that you can measure outdoor water use separate from indoor water use and keep track of it. And then the threshold that was used to determine what a large landscape is a half an acre. There is an off-ramp if you only have a small amount of CII use within your service area, and it requires you to identify top users and then develop best practices. And another great thing is in this, the final regulation is that there are options for regional compliance. And so if you're with a wholesaler or a regional group that offers CII performance measures or CII incentives, you can use those for your compliance. Next slide. So the good news is that we know it took the state board a couple extra years to complete the regulation and get it adopted, and so they shifted the compliance and enforcement on that too. So the state board is not going to start compliance until 2027. And then next slide. They have a compliance pathway, so it's not just going to go straight to fines. The first year they could ask for informational orders, kind of ask you what you're doing to try and meet the water use objective. The second year would be written notices. The third year could be a conservation order asking you to implement things. And then finally, on year 4, you may have civil liabilities for a violation of regulation. Next slide. So that's where we are with the regulation. Again, we're really here to help and to provide information and tools to assist you in meeting that regulation. And we'll open it up now for any questions on that.
Yeah, feel free to type anything in the chat and or yeah, maybe put it in the chat, and then Debbie can unmute you and or read out your question.
All right, are we not hearing anything?
Guess not. Anyone last call, any questions for Elizabeth? I guess you can, if there isn't like a bunch of people all coming at the same time, someone can mute yourself.
All right.
All right, I guess you're off the hook, Elizabeth. There you go. Yeah. No questions. All right, great way to start. Okay, so thank you, Elizabeth, for the regulation overview. Our next item on the agenda is to talk about the CalWEP CI classification guidebook. We are going to have 2 presenters for this section. We're first going to hear from Melissa Matlock, the Director of Programs at CalWEP, and then she's going to be followed by Madeline Wood from the City of Santa Barbara, who has done her classifications and is going to explain the process that they followed and hopefully give you some ideas. And then they'll have a few minutes if you have any questions. Again, you can also put your questions in the chat as they're presenting, and then Debbie can read them out to the presenters. So with that, I will turn over to Melissa.
Good morning, everyone. So I am the Director of Programs for CalWEP, California Water Efficiency Partnership. We are a member-driven nonprofit, and we are here to help you through all things water efficiency, especially with this new recent regulation, really helping to develop tools and information sources, case studies to help you guys be able to meet compliance. So one of the ones we're going to talk about today is our CII classification guidebook. So as kind of Elizabeth mentioned, CII classification, the regulation is requiring that agencies establish standardized classifications of their CII water users with the hope of being able to do consistent benchmarking in the future. So by June 30th, 2027, you have to classify all CII users using an Energy Star Portfolio Manager plus 4 additional classifications that were identified in the regulation, which means that you have to have your CII users classified by 22 different categories. And what we've seen in the reporting, which is probably going to be highlighted later, but for this next year, you have to put in the number of connections by classification. Next slide. So our guidebook objectives was to provide a standardized approach for how you guys would go about classifying these CII accounts, how you can support benchmarking and trends, as well as also like our what we call our stumpers. Like some things are hard to classify because there are multiple different activities. So we have, 3 different case studies of agencies that have gone through and done this, and are in the process of still doing it, and some of the lessons learned that they've had. So really the classification guidebook is to establish clear methodologies for identifying and managing your CII customers. So again, compliance by June 30th, 2027, you have to have a 95% classification rate of all your CII water users. And then from the following years, annually, you have to maintain at least a minimum 95 classification rate. So not only are you having to classify them, but you really need to develop standards of operations to make sure that you are consistently classifying them as you move forward and as you get new customers and as customers change, which has been highlighted. Tia Fleming, who is our executive director, posted in the chat. This classification guidebook is not released yet. It will be released to CalWEP members in the next couple of weeks. So, if you're interested in this type of document or any other types of materials CalWEP has, feel free to reach out to us. Tia and I will put some information in the chat for you guys to be able to reach out to us. Next slide. So here are the 22 classification categories in case you haven't seen them before: banking, education, food sales, healthcare, public service, utility, and then the additional ones are laundries, landscapes with dedicated irrigation meters, water recreation, and car washes. So those are the 22 classification categories that you need to have and develop and classify all your CII customers. Next slide. So one of our case studies that's listed here is from the city of Santa Barbara. And so I'm going to pass this off to Madeline, and she will take it from here. Thank you, everyone. Are there any questions before we kind of go into the case study?
Don't hear any.
I think there was a question in the chat.
Okay.
I think this question is around CalWEP membership. So if you're not a CalWEP member, so the classification guidance was made just for CalWEP members through CalWEP committees. So we definitely encourage you to join. We produce a lot of our resources just for CalWEP membership because we are funded by our members and it's how we provide value back. And so we definitely encourage anyone who's interested in CalWEP membership to reach out to me, and I will put my name in or my email in the chat.
Thank you, Tia. All right, Madeline.
All right. So today I'll be talking about the approach that we took for classifying our accounts and how we intend to maintain that. Next slide, please. So just to give a perspective of our service area and tackling this, we have about 27,000 total accounts, and we are a one-to-one, so one account, one meter. Of those, we have about 2,750 that are our commercial accounts. but that does not include our DIM. So our DIMs are a separate billing classification, separate from CII, and those have already been classified many years ago. So the approach we took was to get an intern. Love interns. I started here as an intern. Highly recommend interns. And one thing that we wanted to do was not have this be her entire job because it can be a little mind numbing. So keep that in mind. And depending on her other workload, she could classify about 60 to 100 of these a day. And I'll talk you through the process we took and some of the resources we used. But just keep in mind, it is something that can take a long time and you don't want to bog someone down. So it's great if you can have them work on long-term projects, short-term projects, sort of mix up their day. But she was very effective in getting these classified quite quickly. All right, next slide, please. So we started with the original DWR categories. So joke's on us, they changed it on us, but it actually ended up being fine because I feel like the DWR categories had more gray area, to be honest, and a lot of our stumpers, as Melissa was talking about, were cleared up with Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So we started early because we were also implementing AMI and we knew we wanted to just get this over with before our AMI went live. So that's why we started early. The things that we referenced were our business license database. So we are a city, and those did have NAICS codes. Those were handy at times, but there were considerably more NAICS codes than there were actual commercial meters, as you can imagine. So it's certainly not a one-to-one. In some ways, it was just a little more confusing. So it wasn't our main way of classifying. It was just something that we would reference at times. We also have industrial waste discharge permits. And so if you are a municipality or if you're a wastewater agency or work with a wastewater agency, I encourage you to reach out to them because they often can look beyond the, very generic industrial name that is associated with an account and tell you what type of manufacturing is happening there. So a lot of these are LLCs. They have a very generic name. It's a very generic warehouse looking building and you're not sure what they do there. But generally, if they're some sort of manufacturer or industrial user, they have some sort of waste discharge permit, and whichever staff are working with them generally know their business and where they could be classified. And then also we worked with our solid waste folks who, due to previous state legislation, had a pretty solid database of food and beverage manufacturers. So like all the restaurants, all the grocery stores, all the corner stores, they had to track that previously for food waste reasons. So that was a great database that we could use. And then Google Maps, it's getting better and better. They have the little business dots hovering over the businesses. And then, of course, Street View to just sort of read the street signs, see, if it's a mixed use development, what's in there. Can you sort of delineate between buildings? That was handy. And then our parcel data, if things are zoned in certain ways and have parcel attributes, that was helpful as well. Next slide, please. So we tried to do a twofer because, like I said, we were doing Street View, and so we were also marking non-functional turf grass at the same time. So when you drop down to Street View and you're looking at signs for buildings, if you see all these parkways and these little itty-bitty CII lawns, we were also marking that so that we didn't have to do that twice. There were also ways that we could just take sort of a whole chunk of businesses and classify them based on common terminology. So this is something we learned from Placer County. First typically is a church. So if you can just search for the term first in your spreadsheet, you can just start classifying those in large batches, in hotel, bank, etc. Some of these are like automotive. Some of these you can just grab all the things that are in that category and classify them all at once. So we used a tracking spreadsheet in Excel, and then we also as we would classify something in Excel, we would then put it in our billing system. And that's really the record. They match each other, of course, but that's sort of the long-term plan, is that it's now part of our billing system. And then, like I said, the Energy Star Portfolio Manager categories did clear up a lot of our stumpers, but when we were not sure where to put things, it was generally the water usage that would determine which category it was going to go into. And so, for example, if there is a gas station, so gas stations are a few things. They're a service, they also sell chips and water, and some of them have vehicle washes. And so almost all of our gas stations are just in services because they have higher water use with restrooms and stuff, and compared to like a Gap clothing store. So we put them in services, but if they have a vehicle wash, that's certainly the predominant water use. And so they were just put into vehicle wash because that's going to be easier to benchmark with other vehicle washes or with other gas stations that have a vehicle wash station. Next slide, please. So when the Energy Star Portfolio Manager categories came out, we created a crosswalk. So some of the DWR classifications were more specific. It wasn't actually that hard. We just combined a couple, split out a couple, and we were able to modify that. What we did do from the beginning is grocery stores were initially part of sales for DWR, and we didn't think that that was an appropriate way to benchmark them because they certainly have more water use than the average retail store. And since they were already separated out, they are still separated out in our system because we thought it would be helpful. And then also our mobile meters, we split those out from other, that just catch-all category of other. And I think it's interesting to hear what is in people's other category across the state. So for ours, what ended up in other is HOA common areas. These are typically the HOA laundry facilities, but it isn't appropriate to benchmark them with a laundromat. You know, they have very different water usage there. And so we kept our HOA common areas. These are not DIMs, so this is essentially all laundry or like a clubhouse type of thing. Those are in other, and then we also have just a few public drinking fountains in our downtown corridor, and we kept those in other, but they also have almost zero usage, so they're not benchmarking with anything else really. Next slide, please. And then for our billing system, we use the Advanced Utilities. It's a Harris product, and it's CIS version 4. And we repurposed a field that was called structure type on property. And that is where we put in the codes to classify the accounts. And this is something that we've done for all of our CII classifications. And then moving forward, I have a couple slides about how we are maintaining this database. Next slide, please. So when an account is turned over, that's at the utility billing office, and staff will ask the nature of their business and check which classification was there with the previous tenant and change it as needed. So we've provided them with a standard operating procedure for that. But as you can imagine, like retail turns into retail, food, beverage, you know, restaurants just turn over into other restaurants. So that doesn't always mean that it's going to change. And in most cases, it doesn't change. And then if it's a brand new account, that is housed with us. So we make the best judgment according to the building plans, but sometimes it's just commercial space and you aren't sure what's going to end up moving in there. But then after they do move into the account, the tenant takes it over from the contractor. It follows that turned over account process that I explained above with the utility billing office. So we try to catch it on the front end, but we don't often know what's actually going to be moving into that space if it's just general commercial space. And I think that's my last slide. Oh, sorry, next steps. So we are working with WaterSmart software. Hopefully they will be able to subclassify the generic CII accounts to have these Energy Star Portfolio Manager classifications. I'm also running reports quarterly to check on these turned over and new accounts, make sure we're not missing any. And then we also have the ability to segment our customers for outreach. So most recently we worked with CalWEP and SoCalGas to do a hotel outreach, and I was able to just pull the report, get everything in lodging, and do some customer communication that way. So it was really handy. And that's it for me. Let's see, Debbie, do you want to tell me any questions you want me to answer live or type in?
We've got a couple of people that want to know, did you consider using your GIS system instead of your billing system?
That's a good question. The billing system is really where we operate. So that is what the utility billing folks operate in and the conservation and supply folks operate in. We don't often have our utility billing folks using the GIS system. So we didn't really consider it. I think that could be handy if across the organization everyone's using it. But for us, as they are putting in account information, what is the name of the business, collecting all that information, that's already going into the billing system. And so that's where we would want to house the classification. And also it's, as we talked about, it's one-to-one with a meter and an account. But if it's just tied to an APN, that could have 7 different meters or accounts that are tied to that APN. So for us, it was just cleaner to have it in our billing system.
Great. And you have a lot of questions here. They want to know how long it took your intern to classify all those, and if your intern is looking to move to another city to do an internship. They didn't ask the second part. I was just wondering.
So she did 60 to 100 a day, and each one depended. Like I said, she could just, First National Bank, First Baptist Church, like those, she could just do huge swaths at a time. Some of them are really easy, and some of them, especially if it was very clearly under the building owner's name, like a person's name, and she would have to dig through and see what is actually at this building. Those took more time. So that 60 or 100 is based on some of them being trickier and taking more time, and some of them just being really quick. And like I said, it wasn't the only thing we had her working on. So that's why it was pretty much, she started summer of 2022 and then got most of it done by the end of the year. But we still had these stumpers, and then the Energy Star portfolio manager came out and that sort of cleared it up. So it wasn't something that was like a quick project because we had her working on it as things were changing on us.
The next question is, if you had the category in the billing system, why'd you also put it in your WaterSmart system? I know the answer, but if you could tell everybody, that'd be great.
So it's not in there yet, but we hope it will be. And since it is in our billing system, it would be really easy for us. We already send a daily account file to WaterSmart. So then we just modify that account file. It just has all the classifications, and that just immediately gets ported into WaterSmart. And so with WaterSmart, we have reporting features where we can more easily benchmark them using our AMI data, which would be handy. And the communications through WaterSmart are really easy. With Group Messenger, there's all kinds of ways that we're envisioning being able to use that. It's not available now. It's something that they know their California users and nationwide users are really interested in, so they are working on that.
Okay, so basically you could sort by category and send an email or a letter or whatever just to that group. That sounds fabulous.
And track their usage, benchmark them. If the idea of all this is benchmarking, that can be done in the platform pretty easily.
Somebody wants to know if you could share your crosswalk in that picture.
Yeah, I'll find my crosswalk. Do you want me to send that to Michelle? Are you doing?
No, so you tell everybody here, they want to know, can you share your crosswalk?
Well, how do we send it out at the end?
You can send it to us. You can
Okay.
send it to Madeline, and we'll make sure we send it with the
Okay.
notes of the
Got
workshop.
it.
We'll send it along with the recording. It's no problem.
Okay. I will send that to you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions, anybody? You can ask it, put it in the chat. If not, you've got Madeline's email and telephone number. Thanks, Madeline.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. Thank you, Madeline. Appreciate you sharing that with the group. So before we go on to our next topic, we're going to do an activity. So now that we have 133 of you here, we are going to do a short activity, and we're going to post it in the chat. What we are going to do is we are going to ask a mini poll of ranking, kind of your interest in hearing more about specific topics. Sneak peek to what we're sharing at the end, but we are going to have a workshop number 15 in November. But we also are going to have a future workshop, and we're curious what everybody wants to hear. These workshops are custom made for all of you, and hopefully are helpful. So you need to tell us, what would you like to hear next? The topics haven't been set. It's a very simple kind of one question type survey, but we really want to, hear your voice. So if you can take a second, click the link in the chat, open it up and fill it in, that would be great. And then if you do it now, we will also have Debbie look at the results at the end of the workshop and share out what everyone's thinking. So real-time info. So if you open it up, fill it in, that would be great. And then stay tuned for the end, because then you'll get the results. So if anybody can't get the chat, you can unmute and let us know, but otherwise you can click on the little chat button, open it up, and you should see the link there, and should be hopefully pretty straightforward. If for any reason it doesn't work for you, you can go ahead and put the answer in of what your top, we did top 10 topics, but top topic that you would like to hear is in the chat, and then Debbie can wrap that into our responses. But hopefully use a Google form, because that auto sums everybody up and makes it easier. But if for any reason it doesn't, we would still love to hear from you.
I feel like I should be playing the Jeopardy song while we're waiting.
I know, right? Yeah. We're going to give you just a minute here, and then we're going to dive into our next topic on dim.
Hi, this is Tennille. I'm assuming we can do it on the phone if we're on Zoom.
Yeah, actually,
Okay.
I have done that the other day. And I was on the road and I did do Zoom from my phone. Yes, you can click on the chat, and it's just a Google form, so I think it should open just fine.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Great question. Hi, Tennille. Thanks for joining
Hi.
us.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi. Any other questions? Let us know. And then in just a minute here, we're going to start and dive on in. We will have Kim O'Kane and Chris Toole from the Data Collaborative. And then we're also going to have Alicia Marone from the City of Oceanside. And they're going to talk about the CI DIM guidebook. So I'm just going to wait one more minute, and then we're going to have them dive on in. All right. So I think I waited a minute. Is that funny how long a minute seems when you're actually just waiting for the minute to be done? So hopefully everyone was able to fill in the survey okay. And if you haven't, you still have time to finish while we start transitioning over to Kim and Chris. So thanks so much for coming. And I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks so much. Hey, I'm Kim with the California Data Collaborative, and we are an association of water agencies, and we help them access and analyze their data. And today we're going to talk about the CII DIM guidebook. Next slide, please. So this is a joint effort between the Water Authority, who is a member of ours, the California Data Collaborative, and CalWEP. Next slide. So what the guidebook is, it's a step-by-step roadmap on how to identify and measure your CII dedicated irrigation meters and your mixed use meters. And we worked with 3 agencies within the Water Authority service area. And we developed 3 different approaches to how to identify and measure those landscapes in order to help you comply. Next step. So the guidebook consists of several different components. We have some background information on what the legislation is. Next slide.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
We also talk about what's going to be provided by DWR and what you're going to need in addition to what they're providing. So some of it's in layman's terms, but there's a lot that's technical because in order to meet this regulation, you are going to need experts in GIS either on your staff or you're going to need to hire experts to help you with it. We go through all of the different data sets that you're going to need. We talk about exactly how to identify irrigated landscapes and how to join all of those different layers together. We have stumpers as well that we talk about in this guidebook, and we talk about what's going to be required in reporting, some tips on managing the data long term, and then we've got some additional compliance tools. So next step, or next slide. Don't need to really go over this. You guys are all familiar with this already, but we're really just focusing on the CII DEM outdoor water budget in this particular standard. Next slide. So what's really important to know is that you've got a little bit of time to get all of your stuff in order, but not much. We really encourage people to start now. Through June 30th of 2028, what you're going to be reporting to the water board and that reporting requirement that's going to start in January is your actual water deliveries, the aggregated volume of your dedicated irrigation meters, as well as some other data that you're going to need to include. And we've put that all in the guidebook. Now, starting July 1st of 2028, this is when you're going to have to start, this is when the date that you're going to have the total irrigated square footage for your CII DEMs. And you're going to report that in January. Next slide. So we've also put in the guidebook, in addition to how you're working with your CII DEMs, but also the requirement for looking at your CII large landscapes that are MUMs or mixed use meters. So these are landscapes that have an irrigated area over either a half acre or more, and whether you're going to need to install a dedicated irrigation meter or some type of in lieu technology to meet that performance compliance. So the guidebook really explains how you're going to do all of this. Next slide. So we've broken it out into 3 approaches. So we've got basic, moderate, and advanced. And the basic, really, you're just meeting compliance. It's still going to cost you money. You're still going to have staff with that are data savvy and have some GIS experience. And there are different data sets that you're going to need to access and manage over the long term. The moderate and advanced not only meets requirements, but then it helps you get to that next step of actually designing programs that are going to help you save water. So it's going to take more money, it's going to take more staff expertise, more data sets, but at the end of the day, hopefully you'll be set up to save more water to meet compliance. Next slide. So when you start to think about choosing an approach, these are just some of the things you really should start considering. So how much funding is it going to take? And that's really based on your staffing, their expertise with the data that's required. What are your goals? If it's just to meet compliance, if it's to, maybe you're looking at budget-based rates. When are you going to be out of compliance? And what kind of data do you already have access to? And who on your team can you go to help get this all started? So those are the approaches, a little snapshot onto, what we're going to be talking about. I'm going to hand it over to Chris, and he's going to go through the methodology.
Hi, everyone. Christopher Tull. I'm the Chief Data Officer for the Data Collaborative. Thanks. So going to walk you through, all of this is certainly outlined in much more depth in the guidebook, but going to give you the sort of power, 9-minute overview of sort of the approach that we outline in the guidebook, starting with, basic data collection. What should every agency more or less be able to pull together to even start this process, getting the DWR data once that is published, and I'll talk a little bit more later about what that data is. ways to join that data together. What are sort of the intermediate steps that we're trying to reach in order to get to our end goal. Some of the, sort of identifying and classifying that's going to have to happen, similar to the CII, meter classification. There's some sort of landscape classification that needs to happen. And then finally, mashing it all together to measure and then report on your landscape area. Next slide. So looking at just the initial data that everybody's got to pull together, certainly starting point is going to be your customer or meter data. Starting with some sort of spreadsheet or, some sort of data that you can pull from your billing system would be probably a minimum. If you have some GIS data already, that's great. Next slide. You're also going to want imagery. And so going back to Kim's, comment that there's sort of a variety of approaches, we sort of put 3 buckets, in the three approaches in the guidebook, but it's really more of a spectrum of like, for, some of these different data sources and different steps, like how sophisticated do you want to get? So for imagery, you could start, if you don't have a lot of budget and you just got to do with what you got to do, use free imagery, use Google Maps, or maybe some free base map that is available within GIS software. Or you could use some more advanced imagery. You could procure your own imagery from a vendor. You could use some data that may be accessible or may, maybe provided to you by the state, depending on, there's some conditions there. But, if you do that, not only do you get to choose the resolution, you get to choose when the imagery was taken. So you could aim for more, up-to-date imagery, or you could try and align the imagery with DWR's measurements. It depends on your goals. Next. You're also going to need parcel data. Parcels are definitely, not a perfect way to represent what the area is irrigated by a meter, but they give you the starting point. And in some cases, they may be, if you're just aiming for quick compliance, it may be a close enough approximation to say, hey, this meter is on this parcel, it's irrigating some stuff on this parcel. So we'll just sort of say that that's the area irrigated by the meter. Next slide. And I already mentioned the customer data, but just want to emphasize that you do need to know where those meters are. You need to have them geocoded. So you can either take the customer service addresses and geocode those. That's what's being shown here. If some agencies may have already geocoded all their meter locations, that can be sort of a pro or a con. It's a pro because you know where the actual meter is, but sometimes that means that the meter is out on the street. It's not, on the rooftop like these images show. So I'd say there's, pros and cons and different ways to think about that geocoding, but you're definitely going to need to know where all your meters are. Next. And special considerations. So going through, as I mentioned, some of the things that you're going to need to identify, as you're going through this process of classifying, be on the lookout for special landscape areas. So these are the areas that through the water use objective can get sort of a slightly higher water budget. Be on the lookout for non-functional turf, like Madeline mentioned earlier. Next slide. And so just a quick example, here's an area sort of, 2 parcels, 2 different meters shown in the little pink dots. The area on the right, definitely special landscape area. It's a big chunk of area. You probably want to mark that out. On the left, you've got some little turf areas in amongst the buildings that, may be non-functional. You've also got this big area in the bottom left that is brown right now because I think it was a drought image, drought year, but is potentially irrigated. So you might want to check that out. So again, just, as you're going through this process, keep in mind that you're going to want to classify these. And it can really be helpful not just to have the meters classified, but also the parcels or the, the areas. So you need to know like, oh, this meter irrigates SLA, special landscape area. But what if it irrigates special landscape area and non-special landscape area? Well, then you start to get into like, well, you need to have the area demarcated and, it gets a little more complicated. Next slide. All right, so the fun stuff, what DWR is going to be providing. Unfortunately, as has been said by a couple other folks already, the data that DWR is providing this time around for the CII areas is not going to be, it's sort of better, but it's more detailed than the residential data that folks got in like 2021. But unfortunately, it doesn't quite get you to the, all the way there. In 2021, folks, you kind of got your residential landscape area. Some folks sort of reviewed it. Some folks just sort of took it as is. And that sort of checked their box of, hey, this is how much residential landscape area is in my service area. But this time around, the data is a lot more granular, but it doesn't get you all the way there, because what they're going to be providing is essentially what you're seeing here. It's just a bunch of blobs. So you'll get, on the one hand, if you see these sort of light green areas near the residential on the left there, they did take the residential parcels and sort of extend those to street center lines. So that can help for folks. There have been a lot of concerns around parkway strips. So they did extend those parcels so that hopefully folks can now, capture those parkway areas if they were not being measured before. But in addition to that, they also, for all the parcels that were classified as CII, they did go through and will be providing this detailed classification layer where you'll get a bunch of these different polygons that you see here, all these fun, colorful shapes, demarcating whether, at least to their best guess, they think things are, landscape is functional or non-functional. You'll definitely have to double check that because, I imagine their analysis is just based on land use codes and things like that. So, but at the very least, you have a first step at looking, hey, where might some of my NFT be? But then it also gives you, impervious, pools, turf, canopy. That could be tree canopy, but also just bushes, bare earth. And so you have all this really detailed data, but it doesn't, nowhere in here does it tell you which of these areas are being irrigated by dedicated irrigation meters. So that's where your job is going to come in. All that data that we've been talking about so far, you're going to layer that in with like DWR's data, or, we talk in the guidebook, some folks have developed their own measurements. And so be able to layer that all in and say, okay, well, I know, that this parcel has 10,000 square feet of irrigated area, but you're going to have to do the determination of whether that there's a dedicated irrigation meter serving that square footage. Next slide. So that's where you get into this area of sort of either looking at premises or meter service areas. Basically, it's, doing the work to figure out which areas are being irrigated by your DIMS. So just as a very rough example, take these yellow areas. This is like an HOA common area, but if those are dedicated irrigation meters in those green dots. So let's say that this area on the right, that yellow outline is being irrigated by those DIMS. And on the left, let's say that area is going to be irrigated by that DIM. This is just based on the parcels. It's probably a simplification, but if you want to get that more in depth and go towards that more accurate, higher sort of, more advanced approach, you're going to need to probably put some boots on the ground and go and verify which areas are actually being irrigated by which meter. Next slide. And I think we could probably just skip to that next one. So takeaways, as Kim said, before you start, make sure you define your goals. Are you just trying to do basic compliance? Or are you starting to look ahead to things like water budgets for BMPs and your in lieu technologies? Are you also trying to do NFT at the same time, or did you already do that? Are you looking maybe a few years down the line at budget-based rates, or even just water budgets for messaging to customers? All of that is going to influence how much time and how much effort you want to spend throughout this process. Second key takeaway is that even using the DWR data packet, it's still going to require time and money and GIS expertise. So, decide on your approach, start building your data team, and get started, because it's going to take some time. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Alyssa Marone with Oceanside to just talk a little bit about her experience being one of the pilot agencies in this project.
Good morning, everyone. As Chris said, I'm Elisa Marone, Environmental Officer here at City of Oceanside. So I run the water use efficiency programs. And this, of course, is one of our big tasks, along with everything we've talked about today. Oceanside was one of the case studies for this guidebook, and we appreciate the chance to get a head start on this work. So I thank all the sponsors of that for inviting us to join. So I'll start by saying Oceanside hasn't done anything more than what's been done in the guidebook so far, but we have had the chance to read the guidebook, the drafts, and I encourage everyone to take a look at it when it comes out. It's a great reference document. They have definitions for all kinds of things spelled out in writing, where you can just really study them. It's a recap of the regulations, which we've been hearing for years, but it's just nice to keep reiterating until we get it all straight. One thing that Kim and Chris mentioned is the guidebook is a good mix of the tech side of things and the regulatory side of things. I shared it with my GIS team in-house here at the city, and they found it helpful. I think it's a great tool to bring our two groups together. It's not too long, and it certainly helped me understand some of the technical aspects of this, some of the GIS, data and what it all means and how it works. And I think it helped my GIS team see why I'm asking for this and what I'm really asking for. So I think it'll be a good tool to help all of us move forward. When I started reading it, it didn't take me long before I thought, oh, this should be called out, like in the structure of the document, pro tip. But really, that's what the whole document is going to be. It's a kind of discussion of, you could do it this way, and here's what you should look out for. You could do it this way, and here's what you look out for. So I think it's going to help us lay out the options going forward. This is such a big task, as we all know. And like I said, I'm glad I have a head start now from participating. But yeah, and the stumper section gives us all something to think about. So we're going to move ahead, starting from where the information we got from CADC, and we'll keep working on it over the next couple of years. So thanks.
Well, thank you all. We have a lot of questions. I'm going to start with DWR. So when will the data be available? Are they giving detailed data? Is DWR going to provide SLAs as well? So let's start with those three.
So we don't know when you're getting your DWR data exactly. So you'll just have to wait until you get an email from them. But it does not include aerial imagery. It does not include special landscaped areas or sloped areas. So you will have to identify those yourself. Does that answer those questions?
The question is, so how do they identify? So they'll identify it, and then what do they do?
Yeah, so then if you've identified SLA areas, then you can, that essentially those aggregated areas, you'll be able to get a higher water budget for those areas. So definitely, if it's worthwhile, as you're looking at your aerial imagery and you're starting to identify those potential SLA areas, like start with a park, like most of that park will be SLA. And so you can start to aggregate those areas very quickly. And then you're going to have those stumpers where you're like, well, maybe part of it is, maybe part of it is not. So that's where it really gets into, making, professional judgments on what it is. But you need to document all of this because that will be included in the reporting.
So justify what you're doing, basically.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And then somebody wants to know, is DWR going to make the imagery they used for the classifications available to the utilities?
So what's in the packet, we've explained it all in the guidebook. There is no aerial imagery. It is what Chris showed you. That's exactly what DWR provided to us to use in the guidebook. So that's what your shape file will look like, along with those classifications on the side that said, like this colored area is NFT or maybe canopy. Maybe that's a shade from a building or a tree. Yeah, so that's what you're getting, as well as a summary of the files that are in there and an estimated irrigated area.
Do we know how many agencies have received their DWR data? If
No.
you've received it from them, would you put it in the chat like, hey, I'm the lucky one, or maybe you're not, I'm not sure. So if you put it in the chat, that would be great to know. And then when the guidebook is actually made into the final aesthetically pleasing form, I will mail it out to I'll email it out to everybody that signed up for this webinar. Any other questions I'm missing? Let's see. Oh, okay. I have one final one. I think it's that somebody's had some changes in who handles some of the DWR reports. And is there a specific person at DWR that they can contact to provide updates?
Yeah, specifically for the CII LAM Lucid data, you can reach out to Shem, and I will put his email in this. They do want to get feedback from agencies about the data. So Shem is the contact there. And I do want to mention that we're doing a joint webinar with CalWEP on the guidebook on October 30th. So save the date. That will be from 11 to 12, and we'll be sending out info pretty soon. And the final is going to be released, yeah, in a couple of weeks. We're still working through the graphic design, so look for it mid-October.
Guidebook will be in its send-outable form by
Sometime in mid-October. Yeah, we're still waiting for the final graphics. There will be a pre-order if you want a printed version, if you're a CalWEP or CADC member. And the Water Authority will be providing a printed copy to all of their member agencies. So
We'll be
thank you,
sending out
Debbie.
that pre-order form this week too, because we need to kind of get an idea. They'll probably be about $20-ish, maybe a little more. They're spiral bound, so they lay flat and that kind of thing. So we'll be sending that out as a pre-order for anyone outside of the San Diego area that might want one.
You may need two, one for the office, one next to the side of the bed. So when you're feeling anxious, you can read it and help you fall asleep.
You put it under your pillow and then all the information just absorbs in your
Osmosis.
head while you sleep.
Just gonna assimilate in. Any more questions, Debbie? How are we doing?
Yeah, we have one more. So does the DWR imagery include all CII landscapes or just DIMS? Does it differentiate DIMS?
Yeah, no, you'll have to overlay where your dedicated irrigation meters are on top of, yeah, what
It
they're
doesn't know a
providing.
DIM from a mom.
It does not include that. Yeah, they don't have your meter data. They don't have your customer data. So there's no way for them to do that. Yeah.
Thank you all.
And it looked like we had one raised hand. Debbie from
Oh,
team.
yeah, it was me. Sorry. So I'm just wondering if, and I know the Water Authority is putting on this workshop, but is CalWEP able to put together maybe a list of contacts for all the different sections? Because I know we were working with somebody when we received our LAM data before, and then now it's Shim. So I'm gonna write it down, but is there a list? And I got on a little bit late because I was on another meeting from 9 to 9:30. I apologize if you already covered this, but if you guys could do that, that would be awesome.
That's a really good idea. Like who to contact for reporting at the state board, who to contact for this at DWR. Yes.
Yeah, and like for the CII LAM, I mean, even into these little sections, that would be super helpful if you can.
Yeah, we
Thank
can do
you.
that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Tia, if you put that together, we can work on it and we can get that out to the group with the
Yeah, we can send it out to everyone.
Yeah, I think that'd be
Where?
helpful.
CalWEP member or not.
Yeah, I think that would just be helpful. Yeah. All right. If there's no other questions, Debbie, then we can move on.
Oh,
to-
we have one other question.
one
If
more.
a meter serves an SLA and other landscaping, what is it?
Yeah, so it sort of depends on how fast and loose you wanna play with things. I mean, if most of the area is special landscape area, and you just have one, you just want to work at the parcel level, and most of the area on that parcel is special, then maybe you just call it all special landscape area, and that's I'm I mean, again, it's how fast and loose do you want to play with things. If you really wanted to do things, you know, super accurately, which again can raise the cost substantially, you know, ask the folks at Irvine Ranch who have gone and done this sort of detailed mapping. You know, you'd probably want to just, you know, work with GIS folks to create, like, say, 2 separate polygons, or like split that parcel just for your own internal purposes into sort of like a non-special zone and then a special zone. You know, the water use from that meter would still just get reported as CII water use or CII dim water use. But then there's 2 different buckets for under landscape area for reporting. So you would sort of split that parcel. Yeah, like imagine this one. You'd sort of maybe take that middle line, dividing the parcels, and sort of drag it over to the left a little bit or something. And then you have, you know, or this one on the left, you sort of split that parcel into 2, and you call the right area special and the left not special.
Justify what you're doing so that you can keep track of it and the state knows.
Sorry?
You should keep track of what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing in your notes and your reporting.
Yeah, well, ideally, you'd probably want to, you know, if you're going to go this more advanced route where you're splitting parcels, like essentially what you're going to do is you start building out like this GIS layer of all of these, you know, meter service areas throughout your whole parcel. It's going to just be like a reference data layer that you use going forward for other things. We have heard from the Irvine Ranch folks who have, you know, done all this work that there are a lot of secondary benefits to doing this, though it is very time consuming and expensive to get down everything really accurate.
And a final question, has anybody used Eagle Aerial for this? If you have, put it in the chat, please. Okay, thank you all.
All right. Well, if there aren't any more questions, we'll go ahead and move on to our next section of our workshop. So we're going to switch gears a little bit away from guidebooks into actually the State Water Board's testing tool. And we, for a little bit of background, the State Water Board kind of gave a sneak peek at the CalWEP's plenary meeting. That was at the end of August, and we got to kind of see a little bit of it. Then they offered to have a few people actually go in and test the tool, hopefully to feedback if there's any mistakes or anything that needs to be changed. Trying to travel a slightly different path than last year when we had the DWR interim tool, and I think I lost track. Maybe 5, 6 different versions came out. And so we're trying to minimize that this time a little bit. So CalWEP's, you know, R&E committee said, hey, yeah, you know, send us a copy. We'll get some people to volunteer to take a look at it. And we had a handful of people volunteer. So that's where we're at. So we are here with Ariel Flores from LADWP and William Granger from the City of Sacramento. They're here to give us just kind of a verbal update on how that's going, what they see, kind of a trailer sneak peek, you know, of what's to come. And then we will also be able to, you know, talk about our next workshop, which is going to be workshop number 15, which are going to be specifically on the reporting tool. But this is kind of just a stepping stone to that full workshop we'll have next month. So with that, I will turn over to both Ariel and William Granger.
All right, thank you very much, Michelle. As mentioned, my name is Ariel Flores. I am the Water Conservation Regulatory Supervisor here at LADWP. Will, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we can jump in.
Sure. I am William Granger, the Water Conservation Coordinator for the City of Sacramento.
Awesome. So, you know, we want to have a little bit more of a panel style review of this, just because since it is draft, it's probably going to change a couple times, but overarching impressions, I think, are a great way to kind of start this road, since the regulations are, you know, starting to be due end of this year. Just a couple thoughts that came from, you know, from our first go around is this is the report that was released is very, very much beta, right? There's a lot of items that still need to be ironed out, both in terms of questions being asked as well as the data connections for every supplier. The state board did, make a pretty valiant effort to connect all the relevant data for suppliers to not have to dig around for everything if that is being reported out somewhere else. However, with more connections means more QA/QC from our point as a reporting entity, right? So one of the things that I would caveat folks once this comes out is definitely verify the sources of data, right? Whether that's the Safer Clearinghouse, SIMS stations, whatever the input data that is being auto-generated and auto-populated for suppliers, definitely verify that beforehand. And then I don't think I can understate enough. There's a lot of reporting requirements and analysis, from the supplier side for things that aren't auto-populated. I think specifically the CI performance measures is an aspect that really needs to be ironed out further. And we had really good conversations with the state board on practical implementation of that in future versions. So, I think there was a lot of good conversations. Whether those suggestions are taken up for this reporting period has yet to be seen, just given the timeline. But I do think the state board is aware that there are many places to improve across the board. So I just wanted to kind of give that a little bit of our perspective and open the floor for Will to share his experience too.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. Ariel talked about this, and I think Ariel, you were the one that mentioned it to the state board, but on the draft form, and hopefully it'll be corrected soon, and a version will be out relatively soon as well. It wasn't altogether clear what was voluntary reporting versus required. So that was definitely a strong suggestion, that they make it super clear that if it's required in the future, but not required, say, January 1st of this next year, that it be clearly marked. We did find a couple of links that didn't quite work, more with linkages to like the EAR and the CII accounts. I don't know if that was just City of Sacramento or not, but we did share that with the state board. And then the other big takeaway that I had is just lock yourself in a room and give yourself months of time. Don't wait to the last minute, because a lot of this, while it may be out into the future and due, say, in 18 months or 24 months or 30 months, you really need more time to work with your internal teams to try to get that data, because the state board's asking that you report out on how you messaged and promoted, say, CII BMPs. So just ultimately give yourself more time than you think. These deadlines are, of course, at the end of the calendar year, when we all are getting kind of cozy and trying to not take a winter's nap, and you won't want to start early. So those were a couple thoughts that I just wanted to share.
Yeah, those are great points, Will. I think just something as we've been talking throughout today's workshop, documentation of how you're doing things throughout the report, or to be in compliance with the requirements. The report does have sections for narrative, which I think is great. I do want to caution folks, right? The UI is clunky, so it may give folks a little bit of a hard time going throughout the report, which has, I think, over a dozen sheets in Excel with hundreds of rows for certain aspects, right? So agency size and teams that are working on this may need to, coordinate, right? Kind of know what's going on, to be able to best fill this out. One thing that I did find interesting that I think is worthwhile knowing is a lot of this information, a lot of the information being funneled into the report is public. A lot of the data that will be coming out of the report will be made public and posted to the state board's website. So, if anything, it does drive for more scrutiny and for suppliers to be as scrupulous as possible to their responses, which may not be as obvious given the reporting template itself. One other item I think that's worthwhile noting is there's a lot of calculus behind the recycled water aspect as well as the potable reuse incentive. I would suggest anyone who will be taking advantage of that in the immediate future or in the any point of the regulation really start identifying those items now and start identifying them early, because it is a little bit of an intricate aspect, requiring some good knowledge of the recycled water system and and potable reuse systems, which again may be outside of the scope of the water conservation folk or the water conservation team. So to echo Will, really just give yourself more time than you need, because there is a lot of that data gathering exercises that the state board, without providing too much guidance in the regulation, is trying to describe that in the reporting. So just to best understand what's going on in there, you really need that time.
Yeah, we'll try as a group to, as soon as we see it or if we know a timeline, give you a heads up so that you can kind of maybe block out some time on your calendar. We don't have that right now, but as that comes out, if we hear it, we'll make sure we try and share it back as a group. So maybe what we can do is see if there's any questions at this time, Debbie, and then Ariel is also going to go over a timeline, which will kind of make a little bit of what they were saying visual. But are there any immediate questions right now, Debbie, in the chat? And if not, it kind of segues really nicely into talking about the timeline and some steps we've kind of outlined between now and December, and some webinars and resources that might be helpful for you. But is there anything, Debbie, right away?
People just wanted to know when it was coming out. I have seen a copy. It's really overwhelming. And the slides aren't being advanced. It was just discussion. Now we're going to see an overwhelming slide on the timeline, but it's super duper helpful.
Yeah. So that's kind of the next section. We wanted to segue right in. Yeah, the last one's just verbal because everything is draft that they've given out so far. If you want to see a sneak peek, we can send that out as well. CalWEP, again, at their plenary, there's some slides that kind of show a couple screenshots that they've shared out, and we can, reshare that out if that's helpful to the group with the meeting minutes. But no, we didn't have any slides at this time for this section. But we do have some for the next section. And so if there are any other questions, we'll kind of segue right into this portion where kind of gives you the long-term view. And then we're going to break this into a short-term action item list for you. So I'll turn it back over to Ariel if you want to dive into this kind of flow chart in our next couple decades. Buckle your seatbelts on. Yeah,
exactly. So one of the things that was a little bit of an interesting conversation point was the extent of how many things are happening at the same time. And, in terms of the regulation, there's several milestones that are overlapping, that are somewhat iterative, that feed into each other. And I think, being able to kind of describe what's going on in the multi-pronged approach that this conservation framework regulation requires of an entire utility is important, and it's an important message to kind of convey to decision makers at utilities, right? So this type of schedule stacking and flowchart was really helpful to kind of start conveying that message of we got a lot of stuff to kind of do, not just right now, but in the long term. And a lot, you know, this is all ideally final, just because the regulation is finally adopted, right? So really we have upfront work in terms of indoor, outdoor, ongoing regulation, ongoing compliance with water laws, and then the very exciting and confusing choose your own adventure for the performance measures, depending on where you're at for your utility, right? However, I think, you know, kind of having this perspective, overarching perspective, you know, down the line also has a really important aspect that forces a very honest conversation for suppliers, which is, you know, all this is kind of going on with annual reporting, but what are the steps that are needed to make sure that not only the implementation is a success, but reporting is a success, right? For example, you kind of have to choose what is the appropriate truth for that for your utility, in the sense of what is the source of data that is really going to feed all the information moving forward, right? For LADWP, for example, we hold the water loss audit and the validated numbers as kind of our point of truth. We report on fiscal year, so the idea that we are conducting and validating our water loss audit once the fiscal year ends to then populate a new report for the conservation framework, which both reports are due at the end of the year, right? Kind of puts in perspective those data requirements and the data requests that are kind of coming in. What is your actual flow, or what is your actual timeline to get everything done, approved? Because, you know, fiscal year reporting due by December 31st, there's a lot of holidays in there, and there's a lot of people not in the office, right? So I think being able to appropriately resource manage is important when it comes to reporting and just the overall compliance for the framework. I just wanted to kind of put that out there, give that perspective. And I think, Michelle, you want to dive into the what to do on the
Sure.
go, like right now.
Yep. Great, no problem. So we realize that that's kind of the long range view, and it's more like a marathon, but we thought it would be helpful to break it down into steps of, okay, that's great, but what's mile one and how do I get there between now and January 1st? So we put together a list of a couple helpful, hopefully, workshops and things to watch for, because there's just so much information coming out all the time. And so what we're trying to do is distill that down. So there's supposed to be a few things that might be helpful for you. So we're trying to be supportive as a team. So first of all, it's the dates, and then also we have a workshop coming to kind of do this as a group. So first of all, there's supposed to be some workshops from the State Water Board, most likely focused on the tool and going over the tool once it's released and updated. Those dates have not yet been released, but as soon as we do, we will make sure we share that out widely. We haven't been given that information, but hopefully we will be given that soon. I think it's hinging on them making updates on the tool that Ariel and William were just speaking on a moment ago. The next things coming a little bit later this month, CalWEP and Aqua and the Data Collaborative are having a webinar on October 22nd from 1 to 2 p.m. And I heard also earlier in a discussion, which I can add, is October 30th. I heard from 11 to 12 is another one on the DIM guidebooks. If you want more information and want an hour-long version of the guidebook, you're welcome to attend that as well. So a couple informational webinars kind of help you along the way. But I hope the tool will come out. Get your hands on the tool. We will be trying to email that out, let you know, hey, it's been released. I would recommend seeing these webinars as kind of lectures or kind of like materials to help you, kind of give you more background. The guidebooks that are going to be released will also give you more background. and information. Get your hand on those tools. Ariel and William said, don't wait. Do a little bit of homework and then come to the workshop on November 20th, which is going to be a little bit of a month and a half from now. And join that, come prepared, come with your workbook, come with your questions. We're going to kind of do that like choose your own adventure. There's not going to be as much slides. It's going to be more like us talking through it. We have confirmed the State Water Board will come and we'll have their MAID coder, presenting. She has, confirmed that she will be there. It'll be 2 hours, hopefully very powerful for you. We'll probably have the beginning piece all as a group, and then towards the back end, we were going to do breakout rooms by topics. So if you have a question on water loss or, some of the different worksheets, hopefully you'll be able to get them answered. And or kind of like back in the day when we used to do our homework and then we would compare answers, we'd be like, well, what did you do? What does that look like? Or does this make sense? So you can kind of work as a group through some of these inputs. This specifically, the breakout rooms will not be recorded. So you have permission to speak freely. And talk about, what's in there, and how you eventually work through as a group to do the reporting process. We're calling it a dry run through. So everyone should come, hopefully with some of their homework done, and be ready to discuss it. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful for you. We will send out the meeting invite after this, and hopefully that's of interest to you. And even if you're not reporting, you can also come and attend and take, listen to how everyone else is kind of working through all these questions and issues that are coming up. Again, the deadline is January 1st of 2025. So if you don't want to be there on New Year's, that really probably for many of you or skip your holidays means mid-December. And so that is coming up soon. But again, we'll be trying to support you in many ways. So that's kind of a cheat sheet of things and webinars that might help you. And then also, I'm going to skip ahead the slide and then go back. We also have a cheat sheet. So I heard this earlier. Someone said, hey, can I have a list of contacts? I think it was Tennille saying, hey, I need to know who to call. This is also, hey, where do I go? And what are the things coming out? So great, you had all these ideas, but where are the informations? You'll be given a copy of these slides. So obviously the rulemaking is on the State Board website. CalWEP is creating a implementation hub. I've been told it will be in December, and that's where a lot of these materials will live. So moving forward, right now they're coming out, via email and kind of incrementally, but we're trying to have a place for them all to land. CII is definitely something that I've heard a lot of people are confused about. It's also the largest piece that we just on Ariel's timeline because there's, kind of a lot of pieces to it. So we have been working on fact sheets for that. That kind of support the guidebooks. Those are coming out. Those will be done in October as well. So in October, if I want to sum up everything I'm saying, look for the webinars, look for the resources. These are held to help you, as you're stepping through things. Then there's also, so those fact sheets should come out. Those are really short. Those fact sheets are, 4 to 6 pages, really trying to distill down. So if you're confused and doesn't make sense in the CI specific space, then hopefully that will help clarify some questions for you. And we did bring a lot of CII in this particular workshop because we heard back from earlier surveys that was the part that you found the most confusing. So hopefully that's enlightened, and these guidebooks and things will help you navigate through it a little bit better. A couple things are already out there. So CalWEP has a CII water use classification and MUM system of resources. There's a link there. There's also a classification crosswalk. If you haven't seen that yet, that should be helpful. So earlier in our webinar, they said people wanted Madeline's crosswalk, so we can share that as well as a cheat sheet. And then this is a larger version that goes to all the NICS codes, and then you should start Portfolio Manager and does a crosswalk between those. So if you are gonna, purchase NICS codes and want that, hopefully this will help us do it in similar ways, because we realized, gosh, if everyone across the state is doing it differently, then that's going to be really difficult when we try and benchmark off that data later, which the State Board had said they want to do. So this was meant to help. It's already out, and it's going to Excel file, and hopefully that will get you on the right step, because that's one of the earlier deadlines that you're going to see on that list. Moving off to the right, there's another guidebook coming out from East Bay Mud, and this one is centered around technology. So if you're like, that's great, I haven't really worked in the CI space before, but I don't really know what a spray valve is, what I'm looking for. I don't know like the latest and greatest on dishwashers, or I find cooling towers scary. This is for you. It is basically an encyclopedia. It's hundreds of pages. I think it's about 300 pages, and it has like literally it's meant to be an index of all of these devices. So if you're going to work on your best management practices, you can kind of think of that as a guidebook of like, okay, I'm supposed to be doing all these activities. How do I do that? And what are these devices that could be helpful for you? That will be public. That will be on their website. That one has been revised and will be released soon as well. So a lot of sneak peeks coming, but these other two have been out for a while. The water loss performance standards have been out for a couple of years, but that's just a reference to that. And then last but not least, the primer. The primer has been around since 2018. I put it back on here because the one thing that's in there is the regulation itself hasn't changed. It did get adopted. How we're doing it has been changing, but if you do need that for your communications or sharing it to the public, that is still truly the law and still can be useful for you as a resource as you're trying to share this out to other participants as we go through this journey together. So lots more resources. This is different from the earlier resource cheat sheets that you've seen us provide. These are new links and hopefully new information, and why we are hoping to have an implementation hub. So hopefully that's helpful. I'm going to stop there and see, Debbie, if there's any questions on the long-term marathon timeline, the what do we do for the first mile, and then the resource cheat sheet.
And we might add a little bit more to this resource.
Yeah,
cheat
we'll
sheet
keep
before
building.
we send it out as a separate attachment.
Yeah, if anybody has anything that you think we're missing, please let us know. We're just doing our best to combine it. We know these are very popular for everyone. Put it in the chat. Happy to add it. This is really meant, by the user for the user. So if there's other great resources out there, please let us know. We're happy to add them at any time. Any other comments or questions, Debbie? No. Okay, I'm seeing a shake nod. No. Okay, cool. I'm actually going to go back a slide now and give a highlight on the Water Smart Innovations Conference. It was last week in Las Vegas. It is the 16th year they've had that conference in Las Vegas. I'm bringing it back as a sneak peek. And how does this tie to the regulations, you say? Well, I think it was an interesting experience because of two reasons. One, it was a blend of two different conferences. So now not only is it water conservation, but it's also water resources divisions together. So it kind of had a more one water kind of approach. Definitely had a lot of conservation, but then we started getting into climate change and into, source water protection and, kind of more one water focus that was included this year as well. And I have on the screen here our also addition of communications. So as we switch into the regulations, one of the key things we're going to need to do is to look or take a fresh look at our messaging and how we're going to communicate this out to our communities. So the keynote speaker that we had was a communications kind of viewpoint. He was doing a lot of videos, a lot of multimedia. He had a way of doing uplifting messages. So I kind of wanted to bring that back on how do you communicate out. He even said it in his keynote, like, okay, we're not here to tell you to use less water. We're here to tell you this is a valuable resource that needs to be used wisely. And here's all the things you can do with it. And so he has a blog. He has a lot of information. If you do have a communications team that's going to help you, that might be an interesting way to do it. We're just as a group, as a team, going to need to be marketing this out on a wide scale. It's also, maybe a place to start a dialogue on how do we want to communicate this out? Do we really want to put out 400 different messages from 400 different utilities of size in California? Or do we want to start doing things on a, state level or a regional level, or, just on an agency level? And what does that look like? And what resources can we share? We've heard it a few times. There's definitely a lot to do for this regulation. And so this is one particular area where we may be able to work together and save resources, save time, and also be a little bit cleaner and clearer on our communication to the customers that need to participate. So for example, Madeline was talking about hotels, and the hotels, like, well, she might have a Hyatt Regency, you know, which she does, but guess what? So do 22 of the other of you on this phone call as well, right? So does it make sense to communicate out and do a best management practice with just one location? Or should we be thinking about working with, you know, Hyatt at a corporate level and trying to work, you know, statewide? So now that we have a state legislation, that's something that we can think about doing. And, you know, kind of working as a team. That was the theme of workshop number 15, is the team, and think smarter, not harder, especially on the communication side. The other thing that came through the Water Smart this year is we had a lot of new workshops and topics. We had climate change, equity, and reliance, water reliance workshop. It was a brand new workshop. I think it was great. It was well received. And people are like, how do you merge those? How could you possibly merge water and climate and, you know, resiliency and equity all into one thing? And I think it's actually important, and definitely we were showing different ways that you could actually pick this up in your projects and actually can do this in our conservation programs now. So we did a lot of definitions and then actually showed realistic case studies. So if anybody's interested in that, I can try and share some information back. We had AMI workshops. AMI is definitely here to stay. I think as you're classifying things, think about, you know, your AMI and how you're going to do this on your journey. We're in this for decades, so maybe think about when you're classifying or when you're doing your GIS that you don't want to think just for the next year, but like long term, and how to do this like as a long-term process. I'm excited for it. I think there's a lot of data that we can utilize, but some of those things started coming out, you know, at Water Smart last week. So I think the tools are there. There was a lot more GIS than I've seen in years past. So it's exciting that there's information out there, tools, case studies, and ideas that we can incorporate into the legislation as we are taking this on as a state. So if anybody went to Water Smart and wants to put something in the chat or has additional things you want to add, please feel free to do so. There was 725 people there this year. Just a note, next year it's moving. So even though it's been in Las Vegas for 16 years, next year it's kind of closer to California and Northern California. It's in Reno, Nevada, and it's moving back to October. This year was in September, but it's moving back to kind of more standard time, October 7th through the 9th. So if you find that of interest, please mark your calendars for that as well. I think, and there were some presentations on the water use objective there too, of course. Any notes or comments or questions in the chat, Debbie? And people can share out if they'd like to on the conference.
Did I see anybody have any questions they'd like to bring up?
But I would say think creative, think innovative, and I would think videos, they were pretty powerful. The keynote was extremely well received, and I think it was very visual. So when you're doing your marketing and whatever, maybe think about how to reinvent your website and be, you know, kind of dynamic and visual to get people excited to join us on our water efficiency journey. All right, if there's anything else there, then I will go ahead and move over to kind of our wrap up. So we did take a survey earlier as an activity. So we wanted to check back in with that poll and see what people think for what's most important. And then, so Debbie can give us drum roll, please. How did we do?
Just a minute, please.
Yeah.
I'll
And
get
then-
it going.
Yeah,
Questions?
yeah. Pull it up. And then Elizabeth, do you have any other insights that you want to share? Or we can just turn it over to general questions on anything we've covered so far.
We can certainly turn it over to general questions. Again, we intend to keep having these workshops. Really appreciate you guys attending, and thank you to all of our speakers for the great information that we're sharing, and look forward to seeing you guys again at our November workshop, where we're talking about the State Water Resource Control Board tool. So, but we'll open it up to questions.
So if you want to, you can raise your hand and you can verbally share your question. And or you can, also do it via chat, whatever you prefer. And so again, this is for anybody on any topic. I'm getting a lot of thank yous. That's nice. But yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot coming out, so I would think about, maybe reserving a little bit of time to digest all this. There's webinars, workshops, real work to be done.
Okay, and I do have the survey results. And Michelle, I sent you a picture of it in case you want to share that on your screen. And we got 76 responses. Number one by far is reporting, with 40% of people saying that's their number one priority is reporting. And number two is CII BMPs. I'm with you.
Do you want to share
CII.
your screen? I can stop and you want to share your screen? I can do that.
Sure, absolutely.
And I do see some questions coming in, so we'll do that and then we'll answer the
Okay.
question. And I'll answer one while we're waiting. So one of the questions was, will there be a recording? Yes. And will there be slides? Yes. We will get both out.
And I'll get you all the attachments too. I made notes of everything everybody wanted. Okay, so can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, 40% of you, number one, reporting. Second up, your BMPs. Next, CI outreach. Data analysis assistance. Did you hear that, California Data Collaborative? Milestone timeline, next steps. Non-functional turf, which we'll definitely go over. Strategies on how to be efficient. And best web one-stop shop library. CalWeb has a great library and great resources, so we'll add that to the cheat sheet. And then how to fund the staff, and additional work. And I got one other, thank you, John. I did get that. So we can send this out to you as well, if this gives you any power and clout with management to help you get the resources you need to succeed.
Well, thank you very much for everyone that voted. Really appreciate that. And I think that will be helpful. And that goes back to we are already on that same page and guessed the number one answer. So apparently we're not too far off from the group and where you want to go. So again, the number one ranked thing was to do reporting. That is the main topic for workshop number 15 is teamwork. And we are specifically dedicating the entire 2 hours to doing reporting. So, yeah. All right. I see Teresa has raised her hand. Go ahead, Teresa. You can unmute yourself and share your question.
Sorry, hold on.
No problem. And in the meantime, Debbie, you can also look. I think there's a few more questions in the chat. And I'll let you catch up. Thank you for sharing the live results of our poll today. And thanks again for everyone that took it.
One that signed up for this workshop, you're now added to my list. So you'll be getting all my notes in the future.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I was wondering if maybe this is something the Water Authority wants to do just for within our service area, but I'm wondering if maybe a poll could be done to see where people are on the spectrum, because I've talked to a couple of people who have said, I haven't really been paying attention as this whole process has been going along because I've had so many other things going on and I needed to see what the final regulations are. And I think there's varying levels of, clearly of how many of us are prepared to respond to these reporting requirements. And I've seen many presentations about it, and I appreciate everyone's input and what they're saying, but I think there's varying levels of someone like me, who we're a small agency, 47 people. I have to do this. I have to do my communications, my policy, my legislation. So the time that I have to spend with this is small up until now, but I need to get into the process. And I don't have a GIS person. I don't have a conservation person right now. I don't even have a management analyst. I don't even have an admin assistant to help me with this. So I think there's some of us that are like, we barely know what we're doing right now. We need a little bit more help. And then there are those people who are at the opposite end of the spectrum, maybe that have, tens of thousands of connections and have, a team of data scientists, but need those people to do that. And maybe there are varying levels of where they're more focused on CII, where others of us are just trying to figure out how we're not going to drown under the length of work that we have in the next couple of weeks. So I'm wondering if maybe there could be a survey that could be done so that we could see where we are, so that we could start putting ourselves into categories, so that maybe there's those of us that are like, we need to start from the basic rudimentary, let's start over from scratch, and kind of help us along the, maybe we could all help each other along the way, so that we're not kind of like what Tennille was saying about a cheat sheet, so that we're not imposing upon those that maybe are more advanced but have more work to do, as opposed to some of us who are just trying to figure out what day today is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that and sharing that out. And what agency are you at? I didn't hear you include that.
Santa Fe Irrigation District. We're in northern San Diego County.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like you would like a poll, understood, and no problem, assuming, San Diego's okay with that. We can send out, and it sounds like not only do you want the poll of like bucketing people, but you also want like who responded, right? So then it's kind of creating like a network. Is that what I'm hearing? That you're like, hey, I want to know who else is kind of at 101 level, who's at like kind of 201, and who's like, hey, let's discuss it, and I've got mine filled in level.
Yeah, and I think also it needs, for me, CII, I care about that, but I care about that a lot less because that's 10% of my service area. I'm very different from maybe like Burbank, who has like, 90% of their services is CII. So maybe like in those buckets, if people are willing, that we could say, here's the small agency, here's the people that are focused on CII, here's people who are just trying to figure out how can I maybe, do I use Eagle Aerial? Is it financially responsible for me? And, things like that, so that we're into better categories of trying to figure out what assistance we need and what just needs, because I know there's also some of us who are going to say, what do I need to report so that the state doesn't give me a fine? Like, I think there's also that level of people out there too.
Yeah, here's a maybe interesting spin on this. We could do a simple survey, or I remember on CalWEP's website, they had like a profile of, who are you, what's your size, and, give me a little information about yourself. I wonder if we could do, something similar, because it sounds like not only do you want to know their level, but you also know the agency size, right? So that's like needs a little bit more in depth. So yeah, we could definitely explore that further. I think a lot of people might, consider that helpful and benefits. And I'm assuming if you opt in, you're also opting in to share your name and agency, right?
Yeah,
so it's kind of
for
like,
sure. And
it's
like
opt in.
Yeah. And then maybe for some people who like, we are members of CalWEP, and I know that CalWEP has a lot of those resources. And I know that it's difficult for some people to join CalWEP, maybe for financial or even, just policy situations. So if there's something that we could say, because even the state board and DWR websites are so difficult to navigate and find that information. If it's like, here is the actual link, that would be super helpful.
Yeah.
And I think maybe I just wanted to speak up because I know that there are some people who are like, I should be further along, but I'm not. But I think we are all willing, and I know this is a great group of people, and I know a lot of you on this call have been doing this for 20 plus years, and I admire you so much, and to take advantage of that resource instead of feeling like, oh my God, I'm such a loser because I haven't done what needs to be done, that people understand, there's varying levels out there.
Yeah, I appreciate you coming and sharing that. And this is a safe space to, be vulnerable and say, hey, I need help, and here's where I'm at, and here's what would really help me. So yeah, I appreciate that comment and you coming, and great place to start, right? Is to get the information out there.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Teresa. Anyone else want to raise their hand, speak out, ask questions? And Debbie, I don't know if there's anything else that's come up in the chat.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah. So
I'm like, I'm not. I'm like, it must be Debbie.
Just so soft spoken. Tia did put in the chat that MWD does cost share 50% of the CalWEP dues. So if anybody down here is interested, it will cover a significant portion.
Okay.
And that is it. We'll send out everything that you've requested plus. And you've got, Michelle, if you could put, I mean, pretty much everybody has our emails, but just in case, put the last slide up with our emails. So if anybody
Yes.
has questions, email me anytime.
Yeah, we're here for you. We look forward to navigating everything. We will get all these materials out. These meetings are open. San Diego coordinates them, but anyone and everyone is welcome. So for if anybody wants to come, feel free to share the link. The link is open. Anyone can register. It's not restricted to CalWEP or San Diego. It's kind of a come join us kind of community. So Teresa, if you and your friends or others, want to come, feel free to do so. The recording as well will be shared out. You don't have to be a member of anything to watch this. It's meant to be here and be a useful resource for everyone. Because at the end of the day, we're all navigating this as a state together. And hopefully this was helpful information for you. So with that, if there is any other comments, I'm going to give you a gift and give you 10 minutes back in your day, which everybody seems to like that. So you're welcome. And I really hope you join again, a repeat, mark November 20th on your calendar. We will send that out soon. And I hope you can attend that with us. And happy to hopefully do that kind of as a part 2. And in the meantime, if there's any questions, anything you want us to add to that workshop, in addition to the tool, let us know. And then we're happy to add that to the agenda also. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time. And I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.